In healthcare coming into COVID, there was the promise of the use of virtual health, digital health, telehealth. And we had been talking about that for a while, and it had been growing off a small base. What COVID has done is accelerated that.
And what's happened in the last 3 months has been an unbelievable level of adoption. In many countries, we've seen 70, 80% of primary care consultations either go online or be carried out by phone.
Interestingly, we've also seen physicians who would not have been historically willing to engage in those virtual modes now doing so and actually thinking that even post-COVID, they want to stick with it. So we've seen a big movement in that direction.
I would really emphasize, do not go back on the adoption of digital and remote working. I think it would be very tempting to say, right, we're through the first wave now, we'll cancel all of these remote consultations and we'll go back to how things were. That would be such a lost opportunity and a wasted opportunity. And of course, actually would also detract from what is going to be needed, which is more efficient services in order to deal with the backlog. So keep hold of the digital technologies and the remote working.
This has been a wake-up call that in the healthcare system, we don't have the nature of resilient plans that we need to have in place. And whether it was workforce, whether it was supplies, whether it was having enough beds, having enough ventilators, etc., that is something that is a bit of a wake-up call to say we need to stress test our system. So during a crisis, do we have established protocols how we allow a nurse in the hospital that can be trained to be an ICU nurse and capable of helping with ventilators? For example, so the flexibility in the workforce.
There are, many people working in healthcare and in care settings and so on who have had a really tough few months. And those people are going to need support, emotional support, as well as a bit of time to rest. And one particular piece that I would point to is the use of volunteers, the use of not necessarily people who've been through extensive training over many years in order to be qualified to care for people, but actually people with far less training who have been able to equally play a very important, very supportive role in looking after particularly some of the more vulnerable members of society.
When an emergency strikes like this one, how do we convert hospital beds into ICU beds? And if needed, how do we convert other areas like hotels, etc., into a lower acuity sites of care when the hospitals are full?
If you'd have asked, I think, anyone working in healthcare in Europe or in the US, if you'd have asked them in January, could you build a new hospital in 2 weeks like Wuhan is planning to do, people would have laughed. And guess what? Many places did. So this ability to ramp up capacity in order to meet a surge in demand, A, has been demonstrated as perfectly feasible, but B, is really important for the future.
How do you take the learnings around the rate and speed at which you can change and take that speed that you've shown during wartime, if you will, and how do you take it forward to peacetime? Obviously, we have moved extremely fast. And so how do we lock in that speed is going to be a big imperative as we look ahead.